Hi, I'm Nick Matthias, and welcome to Fathom the Mind. This podcast exists to explore one central question: what is the nature of consciousness? And while that question might sound abstract, it's actually profoundly important for everyday life. Our understanding of consciousness has real implications for what we believe our minds are capable of, not to mention what we think it means to be human. So we approach this question of consciousness from two perspectives. The first is modern science, and the second is rigorous contemplative inquiry. While modern science directs its attention primarily outward, that is, to the physical world, contemplative practice focuses its lens primarily inward, on the nature of the observer. At first glance, these approaches appear vastly different, but through deep conversations with scientific experts and highly trained contemplatives, we hope to uncover common ground between these two forms of empirical inquiry, paving the way toward fruitful collaboration. Through these conversations, we also hope to empower listeners like you to live lives of both intellectual integrity and contemplative depth. Our guest today is Professor Piet Hut. Piet first made a name for himself in the field of astrophysics and recently retired as head of Interdisciplinary Studies at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey, which was once home to great scientists like Albert Einstein. But as you'll find out, Piet's interests reach far beyond the Big Bang and computer models of the universe. Before he was a professional scientist, Piet recounts tinkering with motorcycles and conducting somewhat dangerous chemical experiments at his childhood farm. But by his late teens, he was also studying yogic texts and making weeklong retreats in Trappist monasteries. At the heart of many contemplative traditions, Piet recognized echoes of the scientific method, the process of formulating hypotheses and testing them with replicable experiments. While physicists use this method for making discoveries about matter, contemplatives employed it for making discoveries about the mind. In our conversation, Piet shares his lifelong interest in studying the nature of consciousness, drawing from not only current scientific approaches, but also global contemplative theory and practice. Recently, Piet began his most explicit exploration of consciousness yet, through his creation of what he calls FEST, F-E-S-T, or Fully Empirical Science and Technology. This is a new research program that aims to bridge the gap between matter and mind. In this episode, we discuss this intriguing project at length, how accessible the objective world really is, and the fine line between dogma and science. I'm so glad to share Piet's nuanced and thought-provoking comments with you today. Please enjoy. So welcome, Piet. Thank you so much for being here. We're very happy to have you on the show.
Thank you, Nick. So am I.
Yeah, so we have a lot to cover today, and we'll certainly, get to talking about your contemplative practice and this new research program that you've been formulating. But I think it's fair to say that you're most known as a physicist. So I was wondering if we could start with your life in science. And I was wondering if we could just talk a little bit about what got you interested in science. When exactly did that journey begin for you?
Well, I guess one point at which it started is when I was 12 years old and I built my own telescope. And I had just gotten interested in astronomy. And at that point, I wanted to become an astronomer. And then I changed my mind a few times. But ultimately, here I am as an astronomer. So that's my life in a nutshell.
So you knew early on that it would be astronomy then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And can you talk us through sort of your undergrad and grad school years? I mean, what were the sort of major scientific challenges that piqued your interest about the field?
Well, for my undergraduate, during my undergraduate days, that was a very exciting time in which so many new discoveries were made in astrophysics. Black holes were discovered. Um, the things like the Hawking effect was discovered by Hawking theoretically. The fact that black holes can actually evaporate in quantum mechanical ways. A lot of more information became available about the Big Bang, and just you name it, it was a golden time for astrophysics, but also for particle physics. And because I was interested in the Big Bang, I started to learn about particle physics at the site, and ultimately I did a PhD, half in particle physics, half in astrophysics. Because if you really want to study the Big Bang, it's of course part of the astrophysics. Well, all of astrophysics, in the sense that it was the birth of the universe. But also you had to know about particle physics because it happened on microscopic scale.
So, I mean, at some point, obviously, you're doing these studies, but you can read an entire astrophysics textbook, a history of the universe, and so forth, and the word consciousness and mind never came up. And so I know that this was another kind of great interest for you. Did your interest in contemplative practice and consciousness sort of co-emerge with your interest in the physical sciences, or what was the order?
No, that started much earlier.
Okay.
What happened in high school already?
Hmm.
What happened is that in junior high, I had started building a telescope and then doing some quite dangerous chemical experiments. I would have been labeled a terrorist, but I had no idea that it was much too early for that label. We built rockets and cannons and all kind of things. I grew up in a small town in the north east of Holland. So there were enough places where you could hide on the farm and do dangerous things. So then I worked on tuning up motorcycles together with the son of a blacksmith I befriended. So we had another laboratory there. But then when I was 17, it was around the time that the Beatles went to India and people started talking about meditation. And I thought, meditation, what is that? So I started reading a chapter in a book about India and about meditation. And I tried it out and I thought, wow, that is so different from the other experiments I had done with a telescope, with chemistry, with motorcycles. This was similar. You were exploring something. Only the laboratory was your mind rather than a physical laboratory.
Mm.
Well, first, the moon and the planets and the stars, the whole universe had been my laboratory. Then my rockets, which I built myself, was my laboratory. Then motorcycles became my laboratory, so I scaled down. But then I scaled up in a different dimension by using my mind as a laboratory. And it was so crystal clear to me, at least, that this was similar. You don't know what to expect. You can have a hypothesis and then you test it. It was completely empirical. And I did not see any fundamental difference between the empirical nature of making your hands dirty and doing things with your hands and trying it out. And I shouldn't say making my mind dirty, that would have the wrong impression, but doing something with your mind and groping in the dark and registering what you see and changing knobs, changing parameters in how you breathe and how you focus and all these things. Unfortunately, I quickly discovered that there is a literature of thousands of years of contemplation which is just openly available, and there is no problem in finding ideas to try out.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just now you were using words like experiment and, I don't know if you said research, but you were using terms like that. Did you initially get introduced to meditation in that kind of framing, or is that just how you kind of naturally saw it, given your interest in science? Because I think a lot of people, when they hear about meditation, they'll immediately think spirituality, religion, which for many people is miles away from something in the physical
Mhm.
sciences. So how did you come to that framing?
Well, it was literally by getting a little bit of snippets of information. In those days, there were no meditation teachers in Holland whatsoever. There was not even a meditation center initially. But soon after I got interested, there was one meditation center opening in Amsterdam called the Cosmos. And there was a little bit of information trickling through. So I read whatever I could, and I basically tried out things for myself at first.
Nice, nice. And
But
so,
soon after that, when I went to college as an undergraduate, I started hanging out in a Trappist monastery in the south of Holland. And that was extremely helpful because when I talked with the older monks there, they sounded very, very similar to anything I had read about contemplation in India or elsewhere in the world. And meeting those people long before I met meditation teachers in Zen or other forms of Buddhism or Hinduism, just hanging out with those people and getting up at 3 o'clock and chanting and then having coffee with them and asking them about their lives. Just the living experience of talking with people who had spent most of their lives investigating their own mind. There was something I didn't have the language for it. It was such a different dimensionality, I would almost say. Listening how they used their mind and how they looked at the world after using their mind and balancing mind and matter. So that was a source of inspiration for the rest of my life, which I'm still working on.
And when was it that you lived with these Trappist monks?
Oh, I think I was 19 years old when I started meeting these, started going to these monasteries. I picked a Trappist monastery. They make beer as well. It's the Trappist monks who make their livelihood that way, which also was a nice extra.
Okay. And how long did you end up staying with them? It sounds like you were actually seeing
So
their daily.
typically a week at a time, but that's
Okay.
a week full time, getting up at 3 o'clock and chanting and talking with the monks. That was enough for me as an experiment. So
Right. And so then were you just continuing to sort of study contemplative practices all through grad school, or was this kind of a secondary stream of inquiry for you?
it was always part of what I did, so sort of on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Actually, when I was in the last year of high school, I had to choose where to go to. There were at those days only four major universities in Holland, in the Netherlands, and I was still thinking about astrophysics, but uh, having realized through meditation that reality has both a matter component and a mind component, both of which you can study in scientific ways, although I couldn't find any book about it. I just noticed that myself. Uh, I really wanted to go to a department of reality studies in my university of choice, but I looked at all four of them and there was no such thing. So then I thought, okay, I have a few choices. Maybe I can study the material universe and do the mind part in my free time. In that case, it should be astrophysics. That's the whole universe. It's all there is materially. So that would be one option. But then I thought, by studying astrophysics, there is no mind in there. It was before exoplanets were discovered, so there was not even a hope to find life elsewhere in the universe. So the second option was philosophy, but reading 20th century philosophy books, they seemed so far from contemplation. I mean, it was just mostly a logic game, and they had basically dropped contemplation in Europe around 1600 or so, so that didn't help. Then I thought about learning non-European languages.
Mhm.
And that seemed, in a way, the most promising because in Holland, the high school I went to, in the high school, besides my native Dutch, we all learned French, German, English, Latin, and Greek. So I got used to other languages. And I knew that whenever I would speak or even read in another language, that the same story would come out very different, that the feeling tones of a conversation or even what you can express, let alone naturally express, is so different in different languages that I got more and more curious what it would be like to speak a non-European language. So I thought either astrophysics or philosophy or non-European language. And then I decided to start with the one thing which was hard to do at home. You can read philosophy and study languages at home, but you don't have a physical laboratory. And also the mathematics is not that easy. It's nice to have people around to help you with that. So that's why I still am an astrophysicist.
But then, as you were kind of moving through your career, is it fair to say that you had sort of a desire to unify, right, these two streams of knowledge? And I mean, were you experiencing that tension on a daily basis in terms of desire to bring up the mind, but then not seeing
Oh,
where it could fit?
absolutely. When I was 17, even before going to college, and also the first year I was in college, occasionally I would try to talk with my fellow students, and occasionally with a few teachers, and express that I said that I would like to extend science from the science of matter to to mind.
Right.
Given that any moment we use our mind to study matter, and without a physical body, would have no idea how to study study the mind.
Yeah.
So it's every moment of our life, both components are there, and I asked the teachers why we didn't have a similar science of mind, and they said, "Oh, but we have psychology and this and that." And I looked a little bit at that, and I thought, "Hmm." It's nothing like the approach of physics, which is based on working hypotheses, which you test empirically, and then you wait till you all agree in a community of scientists, and then you take the next step. There were just psychology theories all over the place, and it never got to convergence. So, but also most importantly, I very quickly learned that I should shut up and not talk too much about wanting to do science of mind, because people didn't take me serious. And worse, if I kept talking about it, they would think that maybe I was completely out of my mind, no pun intended. I think they were, but that's another story.
So, I mean, what was the reason for that? Do you think that many of your colleagues were coming from a different conceptual framework or a different worldview that didn't show them a path to? Because I mean, in the way you describe it, it seems quite natural, right? That we have mental aspects of our experience, we have physical aspects of our experience. I mean, when people talk about the chemical aspects of the world, they're not accused of chemical dualism as if it's some other thing aside from the physical world. It's just understood that there are aspects of reality that we can describe in different ways. So, what was it about your approach that made it feel so natural to talk about the mental aspects of the world, even though there's
Well,
no seat for it?
first of all, you are too young, my friend. That is what all the people always say, and now I'm finally getting older. Uh, you are too young to know how reductionistic and um, how completely focused on rationality and logic and words and concepts the 60s and 70s still were, which I grew up in. Just the idea was so alien to everybody. And I must say, if I take a wider view, as the last 400 years, um, we have made so much progress in the science of matter that as a reaction, there has been a tendency to reduce everything to matter, and that was basically everywhere in Western Europe.
Mhm.
Um, the contemplation was going strong in the Middle Ages and before, but after 1600 it completely disappeared into the background, a few pockets here and there. And there was not enough communication between Europe and Asia and the rest of the world to notice that something was missing.
Right.
I think in the history of humanity, it will always be a very odd period in time and space that for a few hundred years people neglected the mind.
Mm.
And now we are slowly coming back. And also, of course, with AI, once you can make something, then you have extra motivation to figure out what it is and what it is doing, and how far it is similar to what human minds can do.
Yeah, so I'd love to ask you actually about these ideas like reduction and then also unification. So reduction, and you could, I'm sure, give a better explanation, but this idea that all of reality can be explained on the basis of these subatomic particles and their interactions. But then there's also this issue of unification, that we have different streams of knowledge, different fields of science, and we want to unify them in some satisfying sense. But is it not the case that unification doesn't always boil down to reduction? That when chemistry and physics, for example, were unified, it wasn't that chemistry was simply reduced to physics as it was understood, but that physics underwent this radical revolution and then allowed it to actually have more unification with chemistry. So can you comment a little bit on your views on the state of reduction and how unification might relate to that?
Well, to have unification, you need two things to be unified. And the strange thing is, ever since Descartes, around that time, the dogma has been in the Western world that because we are so extremely good in building this amazing thing called natural science, that is probably the only thing. We don't have to look anywhere else. So, to the best of my knowledge, I don't know whether anybody has ever tried in a very serious way. Certainly, maybe some individual here and there which disappeared out of the history books, but certainly not a community of people trying to set up a science of mind, as far as I know. So much of my life I've been waiting to find people like that, but then finally, now that I just got retired and have even more time than I would normally have at the Institute for Advanced Study to really focus on this project, I decided for the rest of my life to focus on science of mind.
Great. So yeah, this is a good time then maybe to introduce directly this FEST program, as you call it, FEST, which I understand has two meanings to the acronym. Can you talk us through how you envision this new research program?
Yes, I mean you have to have a name, and science of mind. That sounds that's a little bit of a mouthful, and it is not really a name. So I chose initially fully empirical science and technology. Mhm. And fully empirical means that no dogmas, but of course you need working hypotheses. Without a working hypothesis, you don't know which experiments, which theory to build, and which experiments you can make to test the theories.
Right.
So the idea of a working hypothesis is something very unnatural. I think the way that science discovered a way of working using working hypotheses around the time of Galileo, I would think. It means that you have an idea, maybe something in the world. It could be matter, it could be anything, it could be mind, who knows what. But you start with something, with a working hypothesis for the behavior of a piece of matter.
Okay.
And then you do an experiment to test it. And then the experiment may partly show you that some part of it may be right,
Mhm.
some part of it may be wrong, and then you make a more accurate theory. You change the knobs and the parameters and maybe whole ideas behind a theory of matter of a particular type of material phenomenon. And with a better theory, you can design better experiments, which can improve the theory. I like to call that the ratchet of science. You ratchet your way up.
Okay.
And if you find something new, then and you test it, and other people confirm it, then that part has been established. You go to the next one, and that is step by step. You make progress. And you know for sure you make progress if you have a large enough group of people who are on the same level of your competence and who can figure out together when something is good enough to go into the textbooks to teach to the next generations. And as a result, natural science is one of the very few, if not the only, human enterprise which for more than a dozen generations, every generation has made steady progress.
Hmm.
It's quite amazing as you think about it. The science has given us so many things. I mean, medicine, quality of living, cell phones, just you name it. But ultimately, I think the best thing that science has given us is the scientific method.
Hmm.
And the scientific method, you don't hear about that when you study science. And if you study philosophy, you hear a whole lot of it, but much of that seems abstract.
So can we
Uh,
linger? Sorry, can we linger on this idea of empiricism then? Because obviously you see empiricism to be central to this scientific method. How would you define empiricism?
well, the absolutely central part of science, as far as I can judge it from my own experience, and also having thought about it and having thought about how to generalize it to the science of mind, is first of all using a working hypothesis,
Okay.
and then choosing a working hypothesis, and then build a theory around that. Then do an experiment, and whenever you have this ratchet of science, of theory and experiment uh, building up, always the experiment wins. If the experiment doesn't agree with the theory, then you have to build a new theory. That is literally what it means empirical, based on experience. So that is one thing, but without a community of scientists, one scientist can easily go astray, is likely to go astray. But if you have a critical mass of people who can keep each other honest, but it should be a self-governing community of science.
Hmm.
And it is also really remarkable that for 12 or more generations, science has been organized by scientists. If you look at religions, typically a typical religion, sooner or later, often sooner, gets governed by people who are more politically driven, sometimes economically driven. It's not the contemplatives. It's not the people who really delve deep into the mind and find new aspects of the mind and new ways to look at the mind. Those people are often marginalized.
I see. So,
So
so
the fact that science could actually survive as a self-governing body of scientists using working hypothesis, that was that is maybe unique in the world.
right, right. So you said empiricism then involves experience, and obviously we have experiences all the time subjectively through our minds, but then in the physical sciences, there's also this, sort of avoidance, to put it lightly, of using your experiments, as you call them, of introspection and meditation and so forth. So what exactly is the issue there? I mean, is it just a difference of terms, or do you think there's more fundamental theoretical things to work out there? Why is it not just a given that all experience is on the table in terms of this empiricism?
Well, the notion of a working hypothesis is definitely crucial, and the difference which most people think there is between a science of matter and a science of mind is that the natural scientists, physicists, and other disciplines, they have the impression that their science is objective, that whatever we discover in physics and in other natural sciences, that there is an objective truth. But of course, in practice, it is the objective, the content of the so-called objective science is being determined by a community of experts, fortunately, and that is an evolving truth. First, we had Aristotelian mechanics before 1600, for 2000 years. Then it turned out that Newton found a much more accurate theory, and that was the one which was used. Then you got Maxwell and Einstein and later quantum mechanics, and in each step, the previous theories remained valid within the accuracy they had obtained because experiments win over theory. That was definitely something you could call objective, but it's a dangerous word, objective, since everything we do as humans is intersubjective. You
Intersubjective.
need a number of people who keep each other honest and compare notes. And in that sense, it's always a second person, never a third person abstract truth that we somehow stumble upon.
I see. So ultimately, objectivity then does not exist apart from this intersubjectivity. That is to say, multiple subjective agents coming together and agreeing on some consensus.
In literally speaking, objectivity, that would be the objectivity of objects. But if there is no subject to learn something, how would we know about it? I mean, anything we know through our mind and through our experience. So, by definition, everything is intersubjective. But the word objective is a shorter word and it's more impressive sounding. So that is what happens to be used.
So I have to bring up your blog or your log, as you call it, and this is the Fest log, and I highly recommend everyone who's listening to go read all of it because it's exquisite. But I wanted to read a quotation that I think is relevant here. You write on your Fest log, in which you're unpacking, this you're thinking about the science of mind, science of matter, and their unification. You say, the variable O, which you call the objective world, is a theoretical construct, strictly speaking, the result of the application of an unfounded working hypothesis, since by definition it is not empirically accessible. So saying that the objective world is not empirically accessible, I mean, that might sound a little surprising coming from an astrophysicist at the Institute for Advanced Study. I mean, how do your peers take to that idea when they hear that? Are they just working with a different definition of objectivity, or is it sort of true, but not something you can practically really act on day to day when doing science?
Well, if you start with the physical world, which we think we live in, and of course, for everyday purposes, there is a physical world, and we do live in it, and we have experience in that world. It's a very good model. Already one footnote: if you dream, you also believe in the world of the dream. Most of the time, unless you are lucky enough to have a lucid dream, and then you know that you're dreaming. But normally, the normal type of dream is that you're being fooled. And so, what does it mean to say that we live in a physical world? First of all, even if the physical world is really existing, but what does really mean and what does existing mean? Those are really tricky terms. I mean, just as a little segue here, quantum mechanics tells us that reality, deep down on the level of the quantum or quanta, in quantum mechanics, reality is neither potential nor actual. And every quantum that you interrogate by doing a measurement, you gain some information of part of it and you lose some information, some uncertainty on another aspect of that same quantum. So basically, the building blocks of our material world are such that they have a sort of a shadowy existence between potential and actual.
So can you help me unpack that a little bit? If they're neither potential nor actual, and these are properties of a physical system, so you're studying some physical system and it's exhibiting some effects, and you're saying that the properties you're measuring of the system are neither potential nor actual. What is there some third thing they could be, or what does that mean?
Well, if you have until a little bit more than 100 years ago, when the classical mechanical worldview was still considered to be not only the best, but was considered to be the truth. That's how matter is. In those days, the world was like more or less like a clockwork. Everything was determined. You cannot measure with infinite accuracy, but in principle it was determined, and every little particle in the universe had a particular position, velocity. Even if you could not measure it, it could not measure it. But quantum mechanics told us from 1925 onwards that it is not the case that you even can talk in principle about a particle having a specific position and a specific velocity and other qualities. If you measure something, you can get a very accurate result from that aspect. Then there are other aspects which are becoming, by definition, less certain. So you could never have said that before the measurements, this particle had this speed and this velocity or other properties. Every quantum is sort of like a black box. You can choose what to measure, what to learn from it. Until you do a measurement, everything is potential. If you you can choose your measurements, whether you want to measure the position or something else, then you can get an accurate result for that part. But by measuring the position very accurately, you cannot simultaneously get an accurate position of the velocity, for example.
I see.
So basically what I'm trying to say is that every quantum is sort of half hiding its information, and you can't even speak about the information it had before you got half of it out, because there is no way after the fact to find out what was erased by the measurement of part of the information. So a quantum doesn't exist as something in a completely real way. It exists before the measurements in a potential way, and after you mention it, part of it can be actualized, but not all of it. So already explaining it takes me a few minutes to give the meaning across.
Sure.
So you can imagine that more than 100 years ago, nobody by the farthest imagination of your mind could have predicted that the clockwork picture of physics, which was completely accepted for 200 years, would be wrong in such an extremely amazing, unexpected way, that reality was not real, but partly actual and partly potential. You can't make that up.
And by clockwork picture, you mean just that in principle, a skilled enough craftsman could build it, right? That you could build the universe part for part, but you're saying now there's sort of this built-in ignorance about the physical world that's actually a property of nature that we can't know enough about it to actually get those parameters fully resolved.
In a way, yeah, there is much more to quantum mechanics. There is entanglement, and there are other fascinating aspects to it. And of course, the notion of a clockwork mechanism, that is really like a metaphor, but it means that in principle, the causality structure, what causes what, in principle, the whole universe was seen as like a billiard ball play. All the particles move each other and collide with each other and influence each other. And that is how the universe could, in principle, be reconstructed if at one moment you knew all the positions and all the velocities of all the particles. In principle, you could compute what would happen in the future. Yeah. In practice, of course, not. I mean, but in principle. Yeah. But quantum mechanics erased that possibility completely.
So, I mean, we got here talking about objectivity. Among your physics colleagues, is there a generally different conception of objectivity now, or has the the effects of this quantum mechanical theory actually seeped into our understanding of objectivity? How has it been reformulated
Well,
in response?
let's go back to to the picture that you are referring to in my log.
Yeah.
The Even if there is an objective or intersubjectively agreed upon universe, then normally, okay, here is a normal picture. There is a very big universe,
Yeah.
and there are some very small knowers, human beings with knowledge, here and there on our planet, in our little corner of the universe. And those people with very small bodies and very small minds, whatever that may mean, in or near their bodies, have an existence within the big universe.
Right.
So that is an ontological, as philosophers would say, that's an ontological description. Ontological is what exists.
Okay.
What exists is the universe, and there are small knowers who have knowledge about the universe, and the knowledge is called epistemological knowledge. So epistemologically, we use our eyes and our brain and our mind as we normally consider it to look around us and to learn about the universe. And by the epistemological attitude and ability of our mind, we can reconstruct a picture of the universe.
So you're introducing ontology, which you're saying is the study of what exists, but then we have epistemology, the study of how we come to know things. And so then how for you does this relate to objectivity and subjectivity?
So if you start with ontology, if somebody tells you, your religion or whatever it is, tells you that there is a world out there which either spontaneously or is connected with a wider world, who knows, that there is a world out there and that what you see and what you experience is really out there. If you take that attitude, first of all, it's very useful. It's a very good administrative thing. If you talk about one cup that we all see and that I can see from different directions, that is much easier to deal with epistemologically again, to consider it ontologically as this one single cup really existing. But in practice, you can never see a whole cup from all sides at the same time. And also to see something, anything, or to experience anything, you only get little snapshots here and there. And in our mind, people would say in our brain, but that's an open question. In our mind, we construct a picture of the universe. So everything we have ever experienced in our life is something in our mind. Our mind, by definition, is what contains all the experiences. So epistemologically, our mind contains all the experience of the inner and the outer world. All my memories, which are in our mind, and all the things that we see and hear and touch, which we say is outside us, all of that is inside our mind. But inside our mind, we have our inner experiences, but there is also a part in our mind which is used to build up a presentation, a representation, we say, of our world.
Of the objective world.
And, sorry?
Of the objective world you're now talking about.
Yeah, of the so-called objective world.
Right. So you're saying that we don't know of the world apart from the information we get from it, but all that information is always coming to us through this thing we call the mind. And so then when you and I and others get together to agree on, well, what is the objective world? It's going to be some subset of that thing called mind, that there's going to be some things in our mental experiences that we all can intersubjectively agree is probably not part of the physical world.
Okay. And here, now we get the question, what contains what?
Right.
So empirically, our mind contains a representation of the world, but then we feel that the representation of the world is relatively close to at least part of the outer world, which contains our body and our mind, and then in our mind is the representation of the world. Now, the representation of the world is empirically accessible. The outer world is not directly accessible, only through the representation. So within the representation, we consider ourselves to be part of the universe that we can see and we can experience. So really, in our mind, we have part of our mind representing the universe. Within that part of our mind, we have a picture of our body as a small part of that world.
Yeah.
And we presume that the body has a mind. Nowadays, we say the brain. That is what people wouldn't do a few hundred years ago, but it's what we do.
Right.
And then within our mind, we think that our mind is enclosed in our brain, which is enclosed in our body, which is enclosed in the universe, which epistemologically is enclosed by our mind.
Mhm.
So there is sort of a body-mind circle. And I mean, this is something people have thought about it for centuries and longer in different terms. So this is absolutely nothing new. But what I am emphasizing here is that if you really want to be empirical, we can say that the body and our bodies and all the material objects, insofar as we have access to them, are enclosed in our mind. And what is outside there, we now consider to be accurate, original, of which we have a copy in our mind.
Yeah.
But then the question is there something outside? And in just about any culture, including the European culture, before 1600, the idea was that outside there is maybe a god. In Europe, it was generally a personal god who was the creator of the world. And in other forms, it could be a whole bunch of gods or a heavenly realm. Or in Buddhism, it's neither a god nor something material. It's something yet again different. You can call it emptiness, but then there is the question, what do you mean with that? That's a whole separate story, maybe for another day.
Sure.
But the question is that we are probably the only culture who really thinks that outside ourselves there is only a material world, most of it with a rock not being alive, not being conscious, and anything, and that there is nothing outside there. I think just about every other culture was different.
So
And
we meaning sort of modern Eurocentric civilization, or what
well,
boundary are you drawing?
it's the science-centered. Well, it's just in one sentence. Around 1600, it was not only science but also humanism and going from, well, too many sidelines. This happened. This move to exclude anything which was not to exclude anything religious as a, well, maybe a hypothesis, but you can't prove that, and we don't need that. That is relatively new, and I don't think that has ever dominated any other society. But let me not go too far in many different directions. What I'm really willing to say is that um, the idea, if I now go back to the idea of trying to set up a science of mind,
Yeah.
if I start with science of matter, we started with the Babylonians doing a lot of observations about the stars. The Greeks using those observations to make a model of the stars and the planets, how they moved around.
Okay.
And then when science started in 1600, Copernicus and Galileo had a very firm basis, namely the Aristotelian Ptolemaic worldview, 2000 years old, based on the Babylonian measurements 1,000 years before that.
Okay.
That is how the science of matter started. And the first 1,000 years were made by astrologers who thought that what they were doing is that they were measuring very carefully what the gods were doing in the sky and using the astrological predictions, which they connected with the positions of the planets, to be useful in their society in predicting what good and bad things would happen in the future. So they were not trying to make a model of planets. They saw these lights in the sky, which were interpreted as gods, and interpreted as being connected with life on Earth. But when the Greeks got their hands on 1,000 years of observations, they basically say, "Oh, that's very nice. Can we get you a database?" And all the gods, you don't need it. It's just a database, please, like ordering in a restaurant. And they got a database and they used that to make a model of the heavens, of how the planets moved around. And on that basis, Galileo and what Copernicus did is just changing the pieces on the board, the sun and the earth, very important, but it stayed mostly the same. And then in the next 100 years, from Galileo to Newton, we got modern science started. But the point is, the one message I want to really emphasize here is that natural science did not start in a vacuum. And what we are now doing what we have been doing in psychology and almost anything to do with the mind, is that we have played a very different game. We have not started with what has been accumulated for a few thousand years in many different societies on the level of contemplation.
So you're saying, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're setting up a parallel, if I understand. So you're saying just as the Babylonians gave us a lot of observations of matter, which then allowed the science of matter to progress, you see potential then in the contemplative literature giving us a similar kind of database, if you like, of mental or introspective observations to serve as the basis for our theorizing in that ratchet of science that you were describing. Is that the fair analogy?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to point to, and what I consider to be the equivalent on the level of the mind is the database of Babylonians and the Greeks is contemplation, because contemplation is what contemplatives are the people who were paid by society to play a very special role, namely to spend most of their life studying the mind, or connected with their religious view, what we call religious, but it was trying to get to wrap their mind around reality, to get a sense of reality on the material as well as the mind aspect of reality.
So, Piet, I'm tempted to ask you for a definition of contemplation, and I know maybe that's a maybe somewhat frustrating question because it's such a big topic. But a lot of people hear the term meditation before they hear about contemplation, and so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what relation, if any, you see between, or how you see the relation between those. But then also, if you'd like, maybe it's worth talking about the ability we might have to draw any boundary between contemplation and what scientists are doing when they're studying matter. Because as you said, on this view of objectivity as rooted in intersubjectivity, is it even possible to draw a very firm distinction between the contemplation you're doing when you are intersubjectively describing and coming to consensus about your mental experiences, and the sort of introspection into your experience, if you will, that the physicists have to do at some level in order to gain, even though they're working with very elaborate physical instruments, at the end of the day, as you say, it's still about a community of people, intersubjectively agreeing on something. So, are you able to draw a strong boundary between these two modes of inquiry?
Um, there is a distinction in the methods for sure. I mean, there is clearly a boundary between matter and mind, um, and ultimately there may not be. But ultimately, you mentioned the notion of unification. Ultimately, I think matter and mind um, deep down are most likely to be unified. At least that would be, again, my working hypothesis, not a dogma, but that is something which I expect we getting closer to. So the fact that when we went deeper into matter, that we found that the way of measuring something was absolutely essential, was essentially changing even the possible outcomes of the measurements. Nobody had ever thought that there was a role for the mind in even interrogating matter, what it consisted of. That it's very hard, it's really hard for us to put ourselves in the mindset of human beings in general and physicists in particular in 1925 to discover that after a few centuries of splitting mind and matter in a way that no society has ever split it conceptually, that even our hard-nosed physics said, not so fast, you can't do that. You can split mind and matter conceptually a little bit, but then it is like a rubber band. Then that's as far as you can go. You need the mind in order to describe matter.
So you mentioned the word.
Granted now, but it was a much bigger shock than the shock of relativity theory.
Yeah, yeah. I want to definitely want to ask you about this word dogma. You've mentioned a couple times the word dogma, and I actually have one of the quotations I pulled out from your fest log, which I now understand is on Substack. So anyone interested, we'll put a link in the show notes. You're talking about this domain of the mind, this domain of the objective world, which is in principle inaccessible to empirical inquiry, and you say that. Positing that the objective world is the be all and end all, or positing that the mind is this kind of final frontier, which I guess largely be associated with philosophical idealism. So we have materialism saying that everything boils down to the objective physical world. Idealism says, well, actually, everything can be reduced to mind. You write that both are ultimately dogmas, and you say it's putting an end to empirical investigation. Can you describe exactly what you mean about putting an end to empirical investigation and how your FEST program can try to get around that roadblock?
Well, I would say the way that scientists tend to describe science is that they sometimes, in their excitement, understandably, forget that everything is a hypothesis. And when you ask them, of course, they would be the first one to say, sure, science is always a work in progress. It's never finished because you don't know what else will be discovered. And you can check that something is correct up to a particular level, but if you look more carefully, you may discover something completely different underneath. Where a dogma comes in is that science is more honest than the scientists are. Scientists are just human beings, and they tend to sometimes get ahead of themselves. And especially in the mid-20th century, you would have scientists on television telling people with a straight face, science tells us that so and so. Well, science doesn't have a voice. And human beings, when they agree with each other as scientists, they have, beyond a shade of doubt, discovered that if you do a particular type of experiment with a particular type of accuracy, you can reproduce that. And then the spokesperson for those scientists say, this is what science tells us, but they don't add a fine print. Under particular circumstances, if you have a measurement which is not too accurate, because if you do it more accurate, it will tell something else.
Right.
So, but of course, it's understandable, but that is what gives scientists sometimes a sense of arrogance, that they knew what the world is like. And um, I could say much more about that, but if I can go back to what you said about contemplation, uh, contemplation, I would say, is uh, like contemplation is for the mind, what a theory building is through experiment, like the scientific method for matter. Meditation is a tool. At least different people can define it differently, but meditation is often used as a tool. You can use it to relax. You can use it to relax to the point that you have new ideas. But the whole approach as a methodology, I would call contemplation, or sometimes spirituality. But I don't want to get the word spirit in there. That is also misleading. So that would be my definition of contemplation. And very briefly, what contemplatives have discovered is that ultimately what they talk about in many different cultures and many different places and times is that they have stumbled upon something which they call non-duality. That there is no ultimate difference between subject and object, between self and other. And if I were to make a picture of what contains what, I would say you have the physical world, to which we have access to a wider mental world for each individual. And outside there is something which is neither object only or nor subject only. Out there is what I would say is what contains the mind, namely the widest ranges of the mind, which I would call what contemplatives discover and study. That's a big claim.
Sure.
And I will have to spend a few more years writing more about my fast log. But that's the trajectory that I'm going in.
Yeah, yeah. So the Festlog then is your attempt to kind of lay out exactly how this line of inquiry will work, and so it sounds very much like you're really trying to give, at its core, you're trying to give a more workable picture of reality. And I guess one thing I wanted to ask you about is this picture you're describing, in which normally many people think of the objective world as the big stage, and then there's these little small people with maybe small minds in their brains or nearby, as you say, walking around. But now you're inverting this and saying, well, epistemologically speaking, that is, in terms of how we come to know things, we really have to think of the mind as this, the stage, if you like, and the objective world is simply this construct that we describe on the basis of some of our subjective experiences. Can you talk a little bit about like what? Surely, if something is an epistemological constraint for us, it doesn't necessarily tell us ontologically that something exists more fundamentally than something else. So, is there like an interplay between epistemology and ontology that is like how we come to know things is informing what we think exists? But of course, we can only think that things exist if we get information from them, and then so we're kind of ping-ponging back and forth between these two branches of philosophy. Is this something that you're addressing in Fest?
Oh, absolutely. And definitely, I don't want to go in the direction of philosophical speculation.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to do is to show that it is actually possible to begin to set up a science of mind. Sort of an analogy what Galileo did as starting to set up a science of matter. Galileo dropped stones from the Tower of Pisa, probably as a thought experiment, Newton looked at an apple, the story goes, and then saw that the moon and the apple obey the same law. Uh, those relatively simple ideas, which were very special already and led to complicated theories, those simple ideas I am trying to develop as an example. Um, to allow people who would like to collaborate with me in a small community or maybe a growing community to do something like what Galileo and Newton thought about and did as experiments without having to go through years of contemplative training. I would like to talk with people who have deep contemplative training to learn from them, not only through brain scans, that is still very primitive compared to the deep mental experience we have individually, maybe someday, but not immediately. Rather than doing brain scans with monks and monkeys, I would like to talk with the monks themselves and to see what we can learn from them after many years of training from their side. But I also want to present things that you can do in a few minutes, just to get a taste. And one of the things I developed over the years is to do what I call a subject-object experience.
Okay.
That you look at an object, and for a minute or so, you become aware that you are the subject looking at an object. You know that, but you sort of feel what it is like to be the subject to look at an object.
Right.
And then you turn it around. You look at the tree or a stone, and you let the tree or the stone look at you.
Okay.
And you do that for a minute, and it's probably, I don't think it would work very well to do that right now.
Sure.
But maybe another time, if we have another video in which we take a little bit more than a few minutes to go in and out and discuss what it is, that would be interesting.
Okay.
But when I do that, just about everybody, at least 90% of the people who I ask to do that, report that they are surprised that they really feel different. Physically and mentally, something shifts. And that surprises them, since it sounds like just a simple instruction, but it shows you, when you do it, that what we normally take for granted, how we feel in the world, we don't realize that we are centralized on ourselves in a very egocentric way, literally.
Sure.
And even if we allow a stone to look at us, or a tree, or whatever, the moment we allow that, something opens up in us. Maybe it's not a good idea to tell this what people would see, but so many people have reported this. I can only invite people to try it for yourself and to see how it would work for you. I could say a lot more, but that is what the viewers would have to discover themselves by a little tinkering and looking around. But so many people have told me that they are so surprised that you don't have to spend months or years on doing meditation to really learn a different way of using your mind. You can do it in 1 minute.
Okay. And that's interesting experiment. And so, how do you see the subject-object reversal as kind of part of your project at FEST of starting a science of mind?
What I would like to do is to basically reconstruct what happened in the 17th century in Europe, and then spread universally. People use Newton's equations in every country. It wouldn't go very well to use something else on that level. So I would say I would like to stimulate the formation of a community. It doesn't have to be one community, but a network of a group of people talking with each other and comparing notes about what it would be like to reproduce the 17th century on the level of the mind. And I gave just one particular example, and I hope that other people come up with other examples. Very simple, basic checks to drop stones or to do anything simple, not on the level of a complete curriculum of a traditional monastery like contemplative in a particular tradition. That is very interesting too.
Yeah.
But imagine that Galileo has tried to study the way that turbulent water moves or that leaves whirling down from a tree. That wouldn't have gone very well. He took very simple uh, things, and this is just one of them.
Got it. So physicists then are they like to start with this very simple system that you can characterize in simple terms, and then sort of build
Yeah.
a baseline of theory and then elaborate on that. So you're seeking sort of the mental analog to that, where you're saying what are the simplest mental exercises we can do, and let's start hypothesizing on the basis of that.
Yeah. And if I can give one more example, otherwise the subject-object reversal, if that's the only one, it's only one specific one.
Sure.
Another example is that if you look at an object like the cup from which I drink water, if I look at this cup, I normally consider it a piece of matter. But if I close my eyes, for me, the cup, the experience of the cup disappears.
Right.
So the seeing of the cup is actually enabled by the experience of seeing the cup.
Right.
So strictly speaking, empirically, this is an experience of a cup. And if it would be a virtual world, it would be an experience without a cup. If it would be a dream, it would be an experience also without a material cup. But normally, when we are awake, we very sensibly can interchange the cup and the experience of the cup.
And your point from earlier, just to bring it back to that the nesting diagram you were talking about, is that if you were to then refer to the objectivity of the cup as it exists apart from your experience, you're still referring to a subset of your experience when you are saying anything about it. And of course, I can be convinced that I'm thinking about the same cup, having seen it and having heard you describe it. But we shouldn't assume that we're even thinking about that our thoughts have the same referent necessarily, right? Because we might have very different ideas.
Well, we do have checks that we have the same experience. If I step on your toes, you you can, as a philosopher, you can say that there is no proof that we are talking talking about the same shoes on the same
Right.
etc.
Right.
So I think these sort of arguments are going in those are not very interesting. I mean, in practice, we know that we are dealing with the same things. The question is that is it possible? The ultimate question is: if you study the mind, do you learn anything new? And most of my physics colleagues say, well, if you can find something with studying the mind, why have people not done it for a few thousand years? Obviously, that was only superstitious. They had superstition about gods and ghosts and whatever.
Yeah.
And then I like to say, well, maybe you guys are substitious rather than superstitious. You have a blind spot, as recently was the title of a book, um, then and you're leaving out something. But I promised you a second experiment, Galileo-like. So I look at the cup and I say, okay, this is in one interpretation, this is a material cup.
Right.
And I don't want to ignore that. I mean, I know how to deal with matter. So that is a truth in a context. Another truth in a different context is that it is the experience of a cup. But then a third truth and it is related to the subject-object reversal. The third truth is that for every experience, there is an experiencer who is experiencing and thing that is experienced. The subject is the experiencer, the thing is the experienced object, and there is something magical in between which we call experience. But those are three different things.
Right.
Now, let us go further. I have a caricature of subject-object reversal, of getting a step towards a unification of subject and object. Let me take another caricature from a different direction. We start from matter, seeing something as matter. We don't see it, we see it as. I can see it as matter, as experience. I can also see it as the appearance, the experience of experience, which means the experience of a subject, the appearance of a subject, the appearance of an object, and the appearance of an interaction between subject and object.
Right.
And I don't mean the word appearance like, well, something is real or it's just an appearance. I mean the sheer appearance, just the appearance of the subject as a sheer appearance, like an image can appear or anything can appear.
So would this be equivalent to qualia? I mean, it's sort of before any story we tell about who's doing the experiencing. It's just that the very experience, the very appearance itself. Then
That's a very good point. It's related to qualia, but the way that the word qualia is used is sort of like a more vivid description of subject-object experience.
okay.
There is still a person who has probably through a brain an experience, but the experience is described more vividly like the core of beyond bits on a screen, beyond information. There is the sense that you have. But I want to go one step further. And I would say now we go to unification. The subject appears. I mean, I see, I feel, I know that I am a subject. I see, feel, hold up a cup as an object. But the cupness, the objectness of the cup appears in I would say, in my consciousness. But my sense of myself also appears in my consciousness. So if we now focus on the appearance of my consciousness as a subject and the appearance of the cup as a subject and the appearance, the sense, the qualia, the whole experience also, then what we call experience in some way, and now I'm becoming a physicist making a ridiculously simple model. That's what we do, the spherical cow, the idea. The experience can be seen as a molecule. There is the appearance of a subject as an atom, appearance of an object as an atom, and then there is a sort of an atomic connection between the two. There are three elements, each of which has a different appearance. Together, they make an object, make an experience.
I have to say, the experiencing part of that kind of relation between the two, I feel like that's the hardest for me to grasp in my experience, because there's a sense in which I can certainly feel the sense in which I'm experiencing, and I can refer to myself doing that. I can describe the cup or whatever it is I'm looking at. But then if I try to think of some third thing, if I take away the experience of the cup, or the appearance, if you like, and I take away any story I'm telling about the self that is doing that, what is even left? Is there something empirically accessible that we couldn't grasp onto there?
There is nothing left. Linguistically, you say the experiencer experiences the experienced. So there are three components, yeah?
Yeah.
And but in a picture, and again, physicists like to make pictures, if you have a stick, there is a left side and a left end and a right end. And you can write a sentence on the blackboard. Now I'm taking off the left side of the stick.
Right.
But as soon as you do that, you have a new right side of a very small stick
Yeah.
and a new left side of the longer stick. You can't isolate on the left side or right side. It's a little bit like quarks, a physicist would say, but that's a separate story.
Sure. So then
So,
these contemplative experiments are trying to get us to unpack these concepts and then build a theory that we can use to then further inspect the mind. The subject-object reversal and the experience as appearance, it's sort of the entryway into thinking in these alternate ways that can then make these other pictures make sense for us.
mhm. So, and the way to do that is that now we put it all together. I have 3 stages, and this is in chapter 3 or the entry number 3 of my first log, right near the beginning. The subject-object reversal comes much later. I think number 19 or something around that place. So the early experiment, seeing as matter, seeing as an experience of matter, and seeing as the appearance of experience, which means the appearance simultaneously, you cannot separate it, the simultaneous appearance of a subject, an interaction, and an object.
Yeah.
So if I look at this cup, I know that the cup appears. But me as a subject, if I would have no experiences, I would be in a coma or deep asleep. As whenever I have an experience, the subject pole of experience, which I identify with, even though the subject pole of experience is inseparably connected with an object, and every time I look at a different object, there is a different subject pole of a different experience. And what Buddhists say, ultimately there is no self. They mean something like what I call a self is a subject pole of each individual experience that I have.
Mm-hmm.
And we learn at a young age that I am different from others. So we learn to collect together all these subject poles and to identify them with with each other.
Interesting.
Just
So
like we see the same cup no matter how it appears, appearance again. So we identify ourselves with one rigid subject which we completely hold onto, not realizing that ultimately on the level of experience, we are just dealing with individual experiences and a pole of each. Sorry, yeah?
no, that makes a lot of sense. And so then you see then part of the practice of contemplation then is learning how to see in these new ways so that you can be aware of this kind of bias that's built into our perception. Is that a fair summary? So I mean, in the remaining time we have left, this is all we could so many directions we could go in, but I think we should talk about some concrete outcomes that could come from this kind of inquiry. So let's fast forward 5, 10, 15 years, and let's say there is that Department of Reality Studies that you wanted to attend, and it looks like FEST. That is to say, it looks like a very unifying, if not unified, science of mind and matter. What would be some of the applications of that? I mean, what would a kind of application of that technology, if you like, look like?
Now I have to ask you a question.
Sure.
I've been willing to ask you questions, but you have been very, very quick in your questions. Let me ask you a question. If you would have interviewed Galileo, or even Newton much later in the 17th century, and if you would have asked them, what do you think will happen? What is the application? What do you think they would have said? Cell phones going to the moon?
Right.
What do you
Probably not.
think?
Probably not. I don't know. That's a good question. But suffice it to say, I guess there's certainly enormous potential. I guess you'd probably agree with that.
I think, see, in a way, I consider myself more conservative than just about any colleague of mine. I feel that if to wrap up the whole the whole story so far, I feel that every moment we know that there is a mind and a matter component in our experience. So I see that I was born in a place where there was 200 years of matter studies. And I asked myself a long time ago, how about doing that for mind? So I'm being very conservative. I'm following Galileo's example of doing very simple things, subject-object reversal, going from matter to experience to appearance. If people talk about cosmic consciousness, like they have this wow, they sense, then whether it's drugs or whether it's traffic accidents or a near-death experience or a very long curriculum of contemplation, in all cases, the description is very similar, that there was no sense of a separate self and no sense of a separate other and no hope and fear anymore because you have hope and fear as a subject. You have nothing to fear, there is no other to threaten you. So to have a very simple experience of these things without taking drugs, without spending a few years in a monastery, I designed these very simple experiments on a Galileo-like level, from matter to experience to appearance, which I can do in one interview.
Right.
So that is my conservative way of trying to replicate what happened in matter. I replicate it in the mind. Whether it works, I don't know, but it's worth trying, and somebody should try.
Of
So
course.
that is all I can say. But then, if you go to the back room where the secret books are hidden, then I can also tell you what happened a few centuries after Galileo is something which could never have been reached by the engineers of the day. The engineers of the day in the times of Galileo, they had built cathedrals, mills, bridges. But if there would have been another 1,000 years of engineering, they would not have gone to the moon, and they would not have brought the power of the sun down to Earth, for better or worse.
Mm-hmm.
That is just inconceivable. So the very simple experiments, much simpler than the engineering, up to steam engines, engineers were ahead of scientists. At the time of building airplanes, you had to use mathematics that could not have been done by engineers without mathematics.
Yeah.
So if my conservative duplication from science of matter to science of mind, if it would go at the same speed, we would have to wait a few hundred years. But we have the example of matter, and there are more of us, and there is the speed of communication.
Right.
So I would hope that in a decade or so, that we would be able to catch up with many of the insights of contemplation with the help of contemplative literature and, even more important, still living oral traditions.
Right.
And then we would be ready to do a real unified approach, integrated approach, and hopefully that would teach us more wisdom than we now have to take the knowledge from matter and the wisdom inherent in the mind and make use of both.
Right, right. So I guess one last thing I want to ask you, Piet, is this relationship between, well-being or personal growth and the empirical investigation of reality to understand the nature of reality itself. And so you were describing earlier these experiences that people can have where, there's a loss of the sense of self and there's a sense of oneness, the radical shifts in their conscious experience. I think many people naturally hear that to be really a description about a spiritual pursuit and therefore one primarily of personal growth. Maybe you feel that you become a better person. And this is, of course, enormously meaningful and important. But I think a lot of scientists are very quick to think, like, well, if that happens for you personally, that may be all well and good, but it's not really going to tell us something about the nature of reality. That fundamentally science is about unpacking the nature of reality. If you personally benefit in some way, that's great, but it's not really the fundamental goal. Of course, a lot of contemplative traditions don't see as strong a separation between these pursuits. So they see ethics and mental stability, we might call samadhi in Buddhist context, to be very much connected to our ability to do empirical inquiry and to rationally inquire into the nature of reality. So in terms of advancing your FEST program and building these dialogues with contemplatives, how should we approach that? I mean, how do you think of the relationship between, when on one hand is a very personal pursuit based,
Mm-hmm.
maybe has well-being implications and so forth, but also this scientific impulse to understand the nature of reality.
Mm-hmm. Well, um, if I am right, and if physics, starting from the time of Galileo, of course there were forerunners, but I take Galileo as one visible proponent out of many. Um, the fact that science did not have an agenda, the fact that people just started to say, well, there is a force of gravity. We can see if two things hit each other, we can see that one billiard ball pushes another, but what is pushing gravity? And they wanted to describe it in the hope to find insight in it. And then we got four-dimensional curved spacetime by Einstein a few hundred years later. Who could have guessed that could never be a goal? That was just doing, setting aside your prejudice and admitting, like Socrates, admitting that you don't know what gravity is, and then using the Aristotelian idea of doing experiments and the Platonic idea of applying mathematics. Mathematics is ideal forms. There are no mathematical objects I can hold in my hand, but I can use the symbols of mathematics and the way of thinking of mathematics to apply it to the physical experiments. The Greeks had Plato and Aristotle as placeholders for two ways of thinking, but the Platonists never applied their ideas to actual practical things. So Galileo's trick was to combine Aristotle and Plato.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what I want to do on the level of contemplation. And I will see what comes out. But again, in the back room, where I have my secret books, which I cannot vouch for at this stage of science of mind. But what I think will happen
Yeah.
is that the the idea of love thy neighbor and the idea of love other people like yourself, which happens in Christianity, which happens in Buddhism, those ideas should fall out of a science of mind. If you only have science of matter, you have to add that. And you have to add, really have to be nice to each other. Well, people, dare I say, are not very nice to each other overall in the history of humanity, nor in the present. So, how can such an idea fall out of a science of mind? I would say, in the back room, I would say, um, if you want to do an experiment in physics, you build a laboratory and you clean it. You don't do physics experiments in the middle of the road or while it rains or there is traffic nearby. You have a special room, you keep it clean, and you can really do accurate experiments. Well, if you look at your own mind, sometimes you are angry, sometimes you are peaceful, sometimes you have strong feelings of love and admiration, sometimes you really hate something or somebody. Well, how do you think you can use your mind as a laboratory? I mean, if you are at peace and if you really enjoy what you're doing and enjoy interacting with others, you're in a better state to use your mind as a laboratory. If you're really angry and if you really want to hurt other people, you hurt yourself. So if you really want to take the analogy of a laboratory in physics, you get for free by translating something like be nice to yourself and to others, and then you will become a better scientist of the mind. Isn't it nice that it falls out? I mean, you don't have to say, are you Christian, are you Buddhist, are you this or that? This comes out. But maybe this is a story for another day.
Sure, sure. I mean,
You can go from revenge to eye for eye, tooth for tooth, to love thy neighbor, and that's something which I think will all fall out of theory of science of mind.
brilliant, brilliant. Well, certainly here at the Center for Contemplative Research, there are many contemplatives who would love to be involved in these conversations that you're describing, where these different traditions are coming together. And so, certainly, hope to foster more dialogues like this, and probably have you on again for another conversation to get updates on this Fest program. Can you just tell listeners where they can find your work? Where should they go to learn more?
Yes. The I don't know the exact place, but if they know my name, Piet Hut, there are many Piets and there are a number of Huts, but the combination is very unusual. If they do that, they can find my homepage, and there will be the word Fest, and they click on it, and then the journey begins.
Great. So the Fest log, yeah, in which I have to say I've read all of it. I think it's amazing. I highly recommend anyone listening read it, because it'll really unpack everything we talked about in much greater detail and provide some diagrams. I think that as you say, physicists love to draw pictures, really unpack the ideas. So Pete, I just want to express my gratitude to you. This was amazing, and I hope we can do it again. And best of luck to you as you develop Fest and unify science of mind and science of matter. So thanks so much for joining.
Thank you very much. My pleasure, Nick.
Thanks so much for joining us for this conversation. If you liked what you heard today, please take a moment to rate the podcast, share it with a friend, and leave a comment telling us what you liked or what you hope to see us explore in the future. We look forward to having you here next time. Fathom the Mind is produced by the Center for Contemplative Research, a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Crestone, Colorado. The founding vision of the CCR posits that the problems of human civilization stem from mental afflictions, and that to address the crises humanity faces and bring about a new era of human flourishing, we must address their root causes in the mind. The mission of the CCR is to develop and apply methods of contemplative science. In support of that mission, the CCR works in 3 domains: mind labs, research, and education. Through our mind labs, we offer expert training in contemplative practice in carefully designed environments for meditation. The CCR also engages in collaborative research with scientists in these and other educational environments. Finally, we develop and share accessible educational resources for people in a wide range of contexts to cultivate mental balance in everyday life. As a nonprofit, we rely on the support of generous listeners like you to keep these conversations going. To learn more, support our work, and access over 70 hours of guided meditations and teachings on contemplative practice, please visit centerforcontemplativeresearch.org. Our host is Nicholas Matthias. Our producer is Griffin Cunningham. Audio engineering by Danielle Bitran Arispe. Original logo designed by Gertrude Bodini.